Beneath the desert of southern Iraq, under more than 20 feet of drifting sand, there is a city. Not just any city. The first city. A place so ancient that when Rome was being founded, Eridu had already been abandoned for centuries. A place so significant that the ancient Sumerians believed it was where civilization itself began, where the gods came down from the sky and handed the gift of kingship to humanity for the first time. If that sounds like something worth sticking around for, subscribe so you never miss a video like this one, and let's go back to the very beginning. In 1854, a British consul named John George Taylor was sent to southern Iraq to locate the ancient city of Ur, the biblical birthplace of Abraham. He set up camp near a towering mound the locals called Tel Abu Shahren, meaning the hill of the two horns, and began digging. He found inscribed clay cylinders, crumbling mud bricks, and the remains of a massive ancient structure. He thought he had found Ur. He had not. The site was far, far older. Taylor's methods were typical of the era, which is to say they were not particularly careful by modern standards. Entire sections of the mound were cleared with picks and shovels, and with little attention paid to the precise positions of the objects found or the layers of soil they came from. He recorded what seemed impressive and ignored what did not. This was the nature of 19th century archaeology across the region, and it means that some of what Eridu once contained was almost certainly lost in those early years of excavation, cleared away by men who had no way of knowing what they were holding. It would take nearly a century before the full scale of the discovery became clear. Between 1946 and 1949, Iraqi archaeologists led by Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd returned to Tel Abu Shahrain with a far more systematic approach. They dug carefully and methodically, recording every find in its exact position, sifting soil for fragments small enough to be missed by earlier diggers. And what they found was something nobody had fully expected. Beneath every layer of occupation was another layer, and beneath that, another, stretching back in an unbroken chain of human presence all the way to the 6th millennium BC. Each layer told a chapter of the city's story. The upper layers held the remnants of mud brick houses from the Sumerian period, broken pottery, small figurines, the everyday debris of domestic life. Deeper down, the pottery styles changed, reflecting different manufacturing traditions from earlier centuries. And at the very bottom, in the deepest and oldest layer of all, they uncovered a small rectangular mud brick building with an altar at one end and an offering table at its center. It was, unmistakably, a temple, and it was older than almost anything else ever discovered in the entire region. And this was Eridu, a city that had been continuously built upon and worshipped at for thousands of years, watching empires rise and fall, while that same sacred temple at its heart endured through all of it. To understand why Eridu matters so much, you have to understand what the ancient Sumerians believed about it. The Sumerian king list is one of the most remarkable documents to survive from the ancient world. Inscribed on clay tablets thousands of years ago, it lists the rulers of Mesopotamia, stretching back from known history into deep mythological time. Its opening line is one of the most extraordinary sentences ever written. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, not Babylon, not Ur, Eridu. The Sumerians believed that civilization itself, organized human society with rulers and laws and temples, it began in this single city on the edge of a marsh in southern Iraq. And the archaeological record actually supports this. The earliest layers of Eridu date to around 5,400 BC, placing it among the oldest urban settlements ever found anywhere on Earth. The temple at its center was rebuilt 18 times on the exact same spot. Each generation tore down the old structure and built a larger one directly on top of it, as if the ground itself was too sacred to abandon or relocate. Think about what that means in practical terms. Generation after generation of builders deliberately chose to make their own work harder by constructing on an elevated, uneven platform rather than starting fresh on flat ground nearby. The accumulated platforms eventually grew into a massive stepped structure, not a direct forerunner of the great ziggurats that would define Mesopotamian architecture for millennia. The ziggurat of Eridu was not an innovation. It was a consequence, the physical result of thousands of years of devotion piling up, layer by layer, toward the sky. Eridu was also the home of Enki, the Sumerian god of wisdom and creation, and one of the most complex and interesting figures in any ancient mythology. Unlike many gods of the ancient world, who were primarily associated with war, conquest, or harsh judgment, Enki was defined by his intelligence and his genuine affection for humanity. He was a problem solver, a trickster in the best sense, a god who valued cleverness over brute force, and who repeatedly used his wisdom to protect humans from the more destructive impulses of the other gods. The Sumerians believed that beneath Eridu ran the Abzu, a great underground ocean of fresh water that was the source of all life on Earth. Enki lived in this subterranean realm, in a palace beneath the marshes, and from it he dispensed what the Sumerians called the Mi, a word that roughly translates to the sacred laws or gifts of civilization. The list of the Mi is a remarkable document in itself. It includes kingship, priesthood, the art of writing, musical instruments, the descent into the underworld, the ascent from it, the craft of the smith, the craft of the leather worker, the craft of the builder, truth, falsehood, peace, victory, counsel, and dozens of other concepts, both practical and philosophical. According to Sumerian belief, all of these things, the entire package of what makes human society human, originated in Eridu, held in trust by Enki beneath the city's foundations. We are just getting to the strangest part of this story, including a flood myth that predates the Bible by over 1,000 years. Subscribe if you haven't already, and keep watching. There is a story recorded on Sumerian clay tablets that is older than the Bible by more than 1,000 years, and it begins in Eridu. When the gods grew weary of humanity and decided to destroy it with a great flood, Enki could not accept the death of his own creation. He chose one righteous man, a king named Ziusudra, warned him in secret, and instructed him to build a great boat. Ziusudra survived. Everything else was destroyed. The parallels to the story of Noah are not coincidental, and they are specific enough to rule out pure coincidence. Both stories feature a single righteous man chosen by a deity to survive a catastrophic flood. Both involve a massive boat carrying animals. Both end with the survivor making a sacrifice to the gods after the waters recede. And in both traditions, the flood is understood as a divine reset, a wiping clean of the human world so that something better might grow in its place. Scholars have debated for generations how these traditions are connected. One theory holds that both stories preserve a distant but genuine memory of catastrophic flooding events in the Persian Gulf region, which geological evidence suggests did experience dramatic changes in sea level at the end of the last ice age. As glaciers melted, large areas of low-lying land that had previously been habitable were submerged beneath the rising gulf. For people living in those areas, this would have been an event of civilization-ending scale. The kind of catastrophe that gets passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years and eventually crystallizes into mythology. What makes the Eridu connection so significant is that the myth specifically names this city as the place where Enki chose to act. Not because it was arbitrary, but because it was the holiest city in the Sumerian world. The oldest city, the place where the relationship between gods and humans was believed to be closest and most direct. That geography mattered deeply. Eridu sat at the meeting point of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and the Persian Gulf, in a landscape where the boundary between land and water was never entirely fixed. The marshes shifted with the seasons. The rivers changed course over decades, and the Abzu, the sacred underground freshwater believed to flow beneath the city, was closest to the surface here, emerging as springs and seeps through the soft alluvial soil. In a landscape like that, where water defined everything, and the line between dry ground and submerged land was always negotiable, the idea of a great flood was not a distant metaphor. It was a living memory built into the geography of the place itself. And then, somewhere around 2000 BC, the people began to leave. What killed Eridu was not war or conquest. It was the slow loss of water. The rivers feeding the surrounding marshes shifted course over centuries, as rivers in flat landscapes will inevitably do across long periods of time. The Persian Gulf continued receding southward as sediment accumulated at the river mouths. The marshes that had sustained the city began to dry out, and the fertile land that had supported agriculture for thousands of years began to accumulate salt as the water table dropped and the remaining moisture evaporated under the desert sun, leaving crystalline deposits that poisoned the soil and made farming increasingly difficult. The cruelest irony in the story of Eridu is this: the city built on the belief that an infinite underground ocean lay beneath its feet, dispensing life and abundance through the blessing of a benevolent god, died of thirst. The Abzu did not save it. Enki's gifts could not reverse what geology had set in motion, and so the people did what people have always done when the land can no longer support them. They moved. The last recorded occupation of Eridu dates to around 600 BC, and when only a handful of people remained near the Great Ziggurat. Even the pilgrims eventually stopped coming. The sand moved in, and the oldest city in the world disappeared so completely that its memory faded from human consciousness entirely. Only the myths remained, waiting in clay tablets for someone to finally read them again. Eridu was rediscovered less than 2 centuries ago, and archaeologists are still working to understand the full extent of what lies buried beneath that mound in southern Iraq. The site is fragile and threatened by political instability in the region and by the slow deterioration of mud brick structures that were built to last a generation and have somehow survived 5,000 years. But what has already been uncovered is remarkable on its own. A city that predates most of recorded history. Inja Temple rebuilt 18 times on the same sacred ground. A flood narrative that shaped religious traditions across the entire Western world long before the stories we know today were written down, and the oldest answer anyone has yet found to the question of where human civilization actually came from. If you want to keep exploring stories like this one, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. There is another video on screen right now that goes just as deep into history. Thank you for watching.